Welcome, guys, to How the Frack We Got Here, a show that takes the news and events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, and on this show, we simply are all about the facts. There are plenty of news stations out there that simply want to do anything short but inform you. Here at How the Frack We Got Here, that's all we believe in. We go up to the lefts, we go up to the rights, we go up to the middle of independence, we go after all sides because there's more than one side of a story to everything. And you need to know it all in order to actually formulate your own opinion. And that's what we try to do here at How the Frack We Got Here. Thanks for listening, and hold on. It's going to be fun. All right, guys. Today's date, April 13, 2023. No, it is April 13, 2023, and this is How the Frack We Got Here, special edition. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, on How the Frack We Got Here. We do take the events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. Before we get started, guys, let you know that we are a news podcast. We do try to watch our language as best to our ability, but hey, words do fly. At the same time, there may be things that might be shown that might be too intense for younger viewers, so viewer discretion is advised. Aside from that, welcome. So, how do we get into this? Well, if you remember, as we tried to cover this, and I know special edition, and usually we're on Wednesdays, but we're on Thursdays for this one time, but bear with, brother. But anyway, we're actually jumping back into the progressively backward state known as my home state of Tennessee, where two young black lawmakers were expelled by the House rather expeditiously, simply put, because they decided to stand with students who are no longer wanting to be victims of loose gun laws in our state. Well, as we did report that those two out of the three Democrats, one was actually allowed to stay because she was white, even though she herself said it. So good on her to actually say what we were all thinking. But anyway, we do have news about those two lawmakers because just like revolving doors, well, people spoke up.
If you're just tuning into MSNBC, this is live footage of Justin Jones, who has been reinstated to the state legislature in Tennessee. The Nashville Metro Council has voted to reinstate him. He is processed with a multiracial coalition of supporters who have flanked him as he's walked into the state legislature, preparing to retake his seat in that body, a body that expelled him in a 72-25 vote just a few days ago. He is holding his placard, showing his placard to the crowd. That is the placard that he will put on his desk when he rejoins his colleagues in the state legislature representing the metropolitan Nashville area. This is an area that is one of the most vibrant metropolitan areas in Tennessee. It's an incredibly multiracial area. Lots of minorities live here. It's a major metropolitan area with lots of industry. And again, Justin Jones has been very clear. He wants to represent all of the individuals in Nashville and their interests, and one of their core issues is fighting against the gun violence that has scarred their community, never more so than in recent weeks with the Covenant shooting at that Nashville school. So he is waiting to retake his seat. He's flanked by Gloria Johnson. She is another one of those three legislators who was threatened with expulsion from the chamber. She was not expelled. She survived by just one vote last week, but she is here as an ally for her colleagues, and she's vowed to continue working with Justin Pearson and Justin Jones to fight for the people of Knoxville, Nashville, and Memphis, all major metropolitan areas in Tennessee.
Yeah. So again, that's one, Justin Jones, who if you've never heard this man speak, very brilliant speaker, very intelligent, very patient, because if you have not been watching how the Tennessee House of Representatives have been treating not only Justin Jones, Justin Pearson, and Gloria, the Democrat three of Nashville, the Tennessee three. If you haven't heard how this House spoke to them, it immediately gives you plantation vibes. I mean, even they said the way he's like, even Justin Jones on the day when they were doing the votes to expel him, he goes, would you allow anybody to speak to him the way he just did me? And it is amazing. And again, that this is the one thing where a lot of people didn't get, like, well, can they come back? I said yes, because whoever voted them in goes back to their metro council of their county, and as long as they vote with full confidence to pull them back in, they can go right back on in. We saw that currently with Justin Jones, and actually as of not too long after his vote, we saw the same thing with Justin Pearson.
The vote happened in less than a minute.
The item passes.
Tonight, ousted State Representative Justin Pearson is headed back to his seat in the Tennessee State House. The decision was in the hands of the Shelby County Commission. Among the 7 members who showed up, a unanimous decision to reinstate Pearson, one of 2 lawmakers whose unprecedented expulsion has become a national rallying cry.
They tried to expel the people's choice and the people's vote. And they awakened a sleeping giant.
Last week, Tennessee's Republican-led House voted to expel Pearson and fellow Representative Justin Jones, both Democrats, after they broke House rules while protesting gun laws.
This is what democracy looks like.
Today, surrounded by a crowd of hundreds, both lawmakers gathered at the National Civil Rights Museum before marching with supporters to fill the commission chamber.
What does it say to you that so many people are supporting you?
Justice happened in the state of Tennessee today, tomorrow, and into the future.
Republicans say the expulsion was fair punishment for violating House decorum, speaking into bullhorns on the House floor. But critics say it sets a dangerous precedent. Now, a group of Senate Democrats are calling on the Justice Department to determine whether that expulsion violated the Constitution or federal civil rights, writing, unless the DOJ steps in, anti-democratic actors will only be emboldened.
So what is wild about this, right? That, as you saw, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson were unanimously voted back to the House, which again is great because between him, between Pearson and Jones, I'm honestly getting Malcolm and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King vibes, or for those in the anime world, I'm getting Huey and Riley Freeman vibes, which again, I am all for because of the fact that there needs to be a change in Tennessee. If you've been following my podcast, guys, you know that I've always said Tennessee for the longest time has been an overly red state. Yes, there are some counties that might be more progressive than others, but overall, Tennessee is a red state. That being said, you see a change, and I love the fact that, and I love the fact that we do see a change. I hate that it happened, how it happened, concerning the fact with the Covenant School shooting, that enough was enough, that kids were leaving school to protest, how Tennessee House members were calling it insurrectionists, which I think is kind of funny that you're going to call a bunch of kids that sat there and said F Bill Lee in a chant are insurrectionists. Yet on January 6th of the year before last, you had a bunch of insurrectionists / domestic terrorists try to overturn a vote. But you don't want to say that because, again, if you're in Tennessee, conservatives will talk, but the one thing they hate is logic and common sense. That being said, however, a lot of people are wondering how the Tennessee House of Representatives was able to move so quickly. I have been saying this for years that the rules in Tennessee when it comes to state and local governments are messed up. And even though this story from News Channel 5 is over a year old, it makes a lot of sense.
Tonight, a News Channel 5 investigation of Tennessee's Capitol Hill reveals how those who have the power make the rules or sometimes just ignore the rules they don't like.
This is especially true in the state house, where, as chief investigative reporter Phil Williams discovered, your lawmakers can introduce major legislation with no notice to the public, and they can kill bills without you even knowing who did it. And Phil, you've been watching the lawmakers pretty closely this session.
Absolutely. And a couple of examples of bills that were killed: one to require high schools to tell seniors how they can register to vote, another to just study whether college student IDs can be used for voting. Both killed this past session in committee on voice votes.
Got a proper motion and second.
All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
How one views democracy in Tennessee's General Assembly depends in part upon where you sit.
Senator Crowe votes no.
In committee on the Senate side,
Senator Kelsey votes aye.
Committee members themselves decide whether bills live or die.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 ayes and 2 noes.
Senate Bill 2168 is headed to the Committee on Calendar.
While on the House side,
all opposed say no. The noes have it. Bill fails.
That power is wielded almost exclusively by the people who chaired the committees.
Bill passes. It's on its way to full commerce.
This is not democracy as far as I'm concerned.
And Democrat Gloria Johnson
Democracy is dead here in Tennessee as it stands right now.
and House Democratic Caucus Chair Vincent Dixie are not alone in their concerns.
Is this system broken?
The amendment system? Absolutely. This is where we need transparency.
It was a process we saw play out in real time this session as we watched seemingly innocuous bills being amended in committee to make dramatic changes. Tori Venable represents the libertarian group Americans for Prosperity.
This voice vote thing, we've seen plenty of committees. I'm sure you did a piece on that Airbnb one where it sounded one way and it went another way.
All in favor say aye. All opposed say no.
No.
The ayes have it.
You have committee chairs single-handedly deciding whether bills live or die. Is that democracy?
I don't think they single-handedly do that.
While House Speaker Cameron Sexton insists he doesn't see a problem, we had watched it happen again and again.
Let's put Tennessee in line with the Constitution.
Here, a bill to require state election officials to simply study the possible use of student IDs by college students to vote was gavelled dead by Murfreesboro Republican Tim Rudd.
All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. Nay. I move that the bill fails.
Before the voice vote was even finished, activists later confronted him about the vote.
How many do we have?
I'll go with the voice level.
We wanted to give Rudd a chance to explain.
You gavelled a bill dead before you even heard the votes. Can you explain that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Can you stop and...
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
In fact, the House committee rules say all votes constituting final action on any bill or resolution shall be by roll call vote. But with Republicans holding an absolute supermajority,
All those opposed say no. No. The noes have it. I'm sorry, Bill Phelps.
there's no one to actually make them follow the rules.
What I hear you saying is they're just making up these rules as they go along.
You heard me correctly. What we're experiencing now is really just an abuse of power. They have so much power and they don't know how to wield it.
And when those voice votes occur, legislative cameras focus on the chair.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes prevail.
So the public cannot see how the members vote.
People are paying more and more attention these days, and they are trying to hide what they are doing up here.
The House Speaker downplayed those concerns.
I think what you have is you have a process where the sponsor of any legislation in the House, when they're standing up there, can request a roll call vote.
Chairman Dixie, you're recognized on your bill 2489.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start, I'd like to request a roll call vote.
I'm sorry, we won't be able to do that because we've already voted on the amendment.
Yet here in the House Local Government Committee, Vincent Dixie's request for a roll call vote was denied because, according to the chair, the committee had already voted to add a technical amendment to the bill. That bill, drafted by area high school students, would simply have required schools to inform 18-year-olds how they could register to vote.
So I asked for a roll call vote because I wanted people to see the obstacles that we face here on a daily basis.
In fact, the House rules also say a roll call vote shall be taken at the request of the sponsor of the bill or resolution under consideration prior to any vote. The Republicans reinterpret that as prior to any votes of any kind being taken.
The rules say you can ask for a roll call before any vote.
Before any vote is taken.
That's not what the rules say.
I would have to refer you to the clerk.
And when it came time to vote,
All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no.
So what did the students hear?
It sounded like yes. It sounded like the yeas.
Noes have it.
The situation you're describing means these committee chairs are extremely powerful.
Yes.
More powerful than they've ever been.
And they definitely have a plan of what's going to happen.
This is an untimely amendment, so I need a motion to take this up.
In fact, we were in that same committee 2 weeks later as it considered a campaign finance bill pushed by the Speaker himself. And Chairman John Crawford allowed the committee to adopt a late filed amendment most people had never seen.
All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The amendment is accepted.
But go back to Vincent Dixie's school voting bill.
Okay, I do see that this amendment is untimely. So we will not be accepting that amendment.
There,
You will
Crawford
have to
ruled
run
that the
your-
Nashville Democrat could not present a late filed amendment meant to clarify his bill.
But if somebody makes a motion, again, to, take it up and it gets a second, then I don't have a choice but to take it to a vote.
But when that came up with Representative Dixie's bill,
do we have an opportunity to vote the untimely amendment up or down? I know in some committees we do that.
you said that there was no way for that amendment to be considered.
Representative Miller, I know it's been done in other committees, but we've not accepted an untimely filed amendment, and I'm not going to start today.
Well, I said we don't take up untimely filed amendments. We hadn't taken any up to that point all year long.
They absolutely have too much power, change the rules as it suits them.
It looks like we have an untimely filed amendment, so without objection, we will move to consider. Without objection, so moved.
In fact, we saw other committees readily accepting late filed amendments the public had never seen, which is exactly what happened with the Speaker's campaign finance bill.
How can you expect someone to vote on something when they haven't read it? Vote on it to know what's in it?
And you think that is deliberate?
I absolutely think it's deliberate. It's a way to keep the public from knowing what they're doing until it's been voted on.
The ayes have it. House Bill 2143 will move to full finance.
Now, as the Speaker told me, the rules say that if there is a question about a voice vote,
Okay, so, I guess Zuckerberg doesn't want us to be great. That's fine. But I wanted to make that a point, though. I wanted to make that a point because that publication was nearly 11 months ago. 11 months ago that the Tennessee House, this is how they work, that it's always been a heavily conservative majority. It's never been overly Democratic. Tennessee I can't think or researched a time in history where Tennessee has ever been overly Democratic or progressive. It's always been conservative. But just to think, you literally heard from News Channel 5 in Nashville on a report that they did that Republicans, mainly the Republican Party, can choose whether or not they want to hear a bill or they simply want to pass on it. They can do that even without the public knowing. And no one doesn't consider that's a little messed up. I mean, it's fracked up. It really is. But the level of that is going on to this day, that is the reason why the Tennessee House of Representatives, overly Republicans, was able to oust Pearson and Jones quite effectively because they own the majority. They sit there and use the whole thing of distraction. The whole thing is like, well, you're distracting our daily orders because they stood with kids who just sat there and said, we need more gun control. So again, if that doesn't tell you anything about this progressively backward state and how much power conservatives really hold here, this is why I say to the youth, because you guys are our only solution. Because the only thing that has actually occurred that has actually has backfired for the one thing that has actually backfired for these Republicans, you just showed an entire generation of voters not to vote conservative. If anything, they'll vote Democratic. And just like conservatives and those of the potato salad raising community, your dominance is starting to lose grip because your numbers are not as great as they used to be. They are dwindling. And the fact that diversity is growing. Even more so as y'all try to push through bills that are aimed at the LGBTQ plus community, bills that are aimed at people of color, and you don't want to say it, but you call this whole thing freedom and libertarian and things of that nature. Let's call it what it is. Systematic oppression 3.0. But again, with those two back in power, with those two back in the House, it is an uphill battle, considering the fact we are fighting an overly conservative state. But let's keep it clear: times are changing as long as the next generation after that, because it's up to this generation, the next generation after that. They have the power to change things in Tennessee. I fully believe that. But moving right along, guys, I did want to cover this next story that Trump, let's just be honest, he's at this point doing what he knows best. Sues and sues and sues people. Although I can't remember, I can only remember one case he actually won, but it's been so long. But anyway, he's suing Michael Cohen for $500 million, basically because he says that the ex-attorney / fixer for Trump breached his contract. Now, for all those that are wondering, this is the same person, Michael Cohen, who is actually state's witness against Donald Trump. As we have seen, the Manhattan DA did bring up articles of indictment against Trump. We did see this week that Trump did report to Manhattan to get fingerprinted and processed, and he's now back in his lovely little fortress back in Florida, saying that this is all big a witch hunt, this will all go away. You know, Trump's beating the classics. Let's just be honest about that. It's no surprise that it's honestly no surprise that he's suing Cohen, because he's hoping to death that he can stop Cohen from speaking. Because again, when it's your personal fixer and he knows where the bodies are buried, at the same time, we don't know how much data, because again, this whole case is built on the fact of Trump's knowledge and hush money payments to a former adult actress during a campaign run. And I'm going to be honest, the multiple lawsuits that Trump is facing right now, if this is the one that puts him out of contention to run for the White House again, that is irony in itself. That the fact of the matter is, the fact that you couldn't be honest about keeping your pants off for a porn star is the reason why you can't run for a second term again. If that's not reality show writing, I don't know what is. But again, we'll follow the story as it comes along. But speaking of presidential runs, from the GOP side, we do know that former Governor Nikki Haley, although that's not her real name, is running for office, is running for presidential office for the GOP. And of course, the GOP is separating themselves from Trump. There is another GOP senator that's putting his name in the hat. And there's no other way I can say this. Yep, Tim Scott, known as Uncle Tom 3.0, has announced his candidacy.
2024, today, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott launching a presidential exploratory committee without referencing the former president's name, offering himself as an alternative to Donald Trump. And tonight here, the latest ABC News poll and what it could signal about a potential Biden-Trump rematch if it were held today. Here's Rachel Scott.
Tonight, Republican South Carolina Senator Tim Scott all but announcing he's running for president in 2024, presenting himself as an optimistic alternative to Donald Trump without saying his name.
Today, our country is once again being tested. Once again, our divisions run deep, and the threat to our future is real. Joe Biden and the radical left have chosen a culture of grievance over greatness.
The Senate's only Black Republican insisting Democrats, quote, weaponize race to divide us, pitching his life story as proof of a different path forward.
I was raised by a single mother in poverty. The spoons in our apartment were plastic, not silver. But we had faith. We put in the work, and we had an unwavering belief that we too could live the American dream.
And he refused to take on Trump when asked how he would defeat the former president in the Republican primary.
I think we're better off having a conversation about beating Joe Biden.
But the question among Republicans right now, which candidate can actually do that? An ABC News Ipsos poll taken after Trump was arrested and charged last week shows just 25% of voters have a favorable opinion of him. President Biden's favorability numbers 9 points higher.
Senator Scott also made no mention of the other South Carolinian in the race, former Governor Nikki Haley, who appointed him to the Senate in 2012. He has a stop in New Hampshire tomorrow before rallying voters in his home state of South Carolina at the end of the week, David.
Rachel.
Yes, Tim Scott, a man who says that the Democrats are attempting to radicalize, using race to divide us. Yes, Democrats. Yeah, I mean, it has nothing to do with the fact that the latest attacks on people of color, GOP, the people of color, people who are not white, LGBTQ+, it has to be the Democrats that are utilizing them by putting oppressive rules and regulations and going after women and redlining and still giving money to, wait, I'm sorry, that's GOP. So this is, and forget my language, this is the bullshit. Tim Scott is doing what he is doing, what I like to call the GOP conservative checklist. He has to say family. He has to say faith. He unfortunately did not, he constitutes hard work. He tries to there and say, and he tries to do this because for a lot of conservatives, they dismay the fact that they don't believe, number one, they don't believe in systemic racism. Conservatives do not. They will say everything short of that. As you saw what Tim Scott said, I was raised by a single black mom. All our spoons in our house were plastic. They weren't silver, but we had faith. We put in the work, and here we are. If that does not sound like the BS line to make white people who are racist feel good about what they say about black folks, if that is not the line, because he has to do it. Because I always said with GOP / conservatives, you got to hit those three things. You got to hit family, faith, firearms. He did 2 out of 3. And even though he sidestepped the whole thing about Trump, because again, he rode the Trump train. For a lot of those Republicans, they rode the Trump train when it was favorable because they wanted the votes. And because the cult following at that time was huge. I mean, it's not as big as it used to be now, but it used to be huge. But Tim Scott, moving along with Nikki Haley, are right now 2 proponents that are wanting to run for president. And I'm just like, you want to stick with a woman who legally changed her name, because if she ran in her real name, she wouldn't even be on the ballot for GOP. And Tim Scott, who looks like he was basically adopted by the blind side and got raised to not be believed that he was a black child, is exactly. It's almost like Tim Scott is basically the black friend that every racist white guy has, just to prove they're not racist. Because Tim Scott hasn't done anything. Nikki Haley hasn't done anything. I said before, Tim Scott, when working the George Floyd police reform bill, single-handedly killed it because he was arguing for the Republicans. He didn't like the fact that they were banning chokeholds. He didn't like the fact that they wanted to ban no-knock warrants. He didn't like the fact that they wanted to remove quantity of immunity from law enforcement agents. Those were his big 3 things he didn't want removed off that bill. He single-handedly killed it. And let's not forget, he is doing the bidding of the GOP mafia. So again, this whole thing of Biden in the extreme left, that's basically Fox News propaganda waiting to be heard by those who still watch Fox News and still believe it's a news station, which it's not. It's been argued already and has been put on record that Fox News is not a real news station. It is an entertainment website that's basically state-run propaganda. And now you have and another thing is you have the only black person in the GOP running for president. I always ask this question, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be right about this. If it came down to an Indian woman if it came down to an Indian woman who's pretending to be a white woman under a different name, if it came down to a black man, the only black man in an all-white political party, and he said he wanted to run for president, and she said she wanted to run for president, I wonder which way their political co-workers would go with. It would be interesting because I don't think they go. I think Tim Scott likes to think that his fellow politicians will vote for him. He'll be rudely awakened, and at the same time, Nikki Haley's gonna have a problem because how many people who are Republicans really don't know her actual name and her heritage? Might be an eye-opening for both of them, but we'll follow it because again, as we get closer to 2024, the race will heat up. At this point, Mike Pence still hasn't announced whether or not he'll run. And from the Democratic side, we have not seen any contenders. Even though Joe Biden has said that he will run, I still think that Biden has done an okay job. Keep in mind, I said okay. There's a lot of things Biden did that I did not agree with. I still think there needs to be variety in voting, but this is why I sit there and say, for all those, if you want choices, you have to uplift them. At the same time, I know Marianne Wilson is trying to jump back into the fray again. And I'm sorry, she is another person I wouldn't vote for if I had to, and my life depended on it. Just wouldn't do it. But again, I digress. Moving right along, guys. You guys remember the story of the 6-year-old that basically shot his teacher because he brought a gun to school? And that, a lot of people were like, when the ruling came back and said the 6-year-old will not be charged, which we already knew. You're not going to charge a 6-year-old. Well, we knew the parents were going to face it as the mother of that child has been indicted on charges of felony child neglect and 1 count of recklessly leaving a firearm to endanger a child, which, as it should. And even though this is the same group of parents that sat there and said, well, we're very safe, our kid is fine, we're very proactive in firearm safety, yet the 6-year-old knew where to find the gun. At the same time, we're fighting, and think about this, we're finding more and more about this kid, that he's had a history of issues with the school, history of violence, not only with the school, but with law enforcement. At the same time, the story that they're trying to say now is that the boy has a disability and was under a care plan, which required a parent to be at the school with him. That's the BS you're going with? What 6-year-old? And I said, I'm not trying to knock disabilities. I am not knocking disabilities in any sense of the form. But you're going to sit there and tell me that a kid, a 6-year-old with disability, was able to find a firearm, make sure it's loaded, and use it on a teacher that he didn't like. And you're going to say because his parent wasn't with him on that day? No, that's weak sauce. And so the mother is definitely being charged for it, as she should. I think the book should get thrown at her because I am a big proponent of firearm safety. And the fact of the matter is, if your firearm is in the hands of your child who decides to use it on another person, you honestly should face the full charges of that. Anybody who's in gun safety 101 will fully agree. And if not, then you're a hypocrite. Simple and plain. Another story that we're getting to, guys, is again, I keep on telling you, because as most conservatives do talk about, oh, there's a war on Christmas, there's a war on Christianity, there's a war on this, when really it's not. But I'll tell you what there is a war on. GOP conservatives and extreme Christians are waging a war on education, especially in the competition of the Hold My Beer competition, which right now Florida is running strong. Texas has decided to up the ante. What I mean by that is that this Texas county, ordered to return banned books to its shelves, has sat there and said, you know what? Let's consider shutting down our library system. And this is in Llano County in Texas, where they're having a meeting to include whether or not to continue or cease operations of the public library system. Think about that for a second. They're deciding whether or not in a public library, because they were told that you need to return banned books that some people, keep in mind, some people found inappropriate or insulting, so the books were removed. However, federal courts have sat there and said that's not the case because it's a public library. Those books need to be returned back. So instead of them actually following federal rulings and going from that nature, they decided, we'll just close down the public libraries. If that is not oppression in its purest form. And I said before, it's an attack on education. You know why they attack education? I gotta give George Carlin credit because he said this best, that the GOP and conservatives don't want educated voters. They do not want critical thinking, critical process solving individuals. They want button mashers. They want people, when they hear something, yes, press the button. They don't want to hear someone go, wait a minute, why do I need to press this button? They don't want that. And GOP doesn't want that because they want submission, they want complacency, they want worker bees. And to think about that, how do you stop that? You stop education. How do you stop education? You cut educational funding. We have seen elementary and high schools have to cut programs like music and metal shop, wood shop, chorus, band programs, auto mechanics, vocational training for those that want to go into the trade industry. We have seen schools cut these things. Oh, and 4-H, in case you want to learn about farming. We've seen schools cut this funding because every year the educational budget from a federal standpoint is shortened, which means that going down to states and counties and cities will also be cut. And again, you've seen the ramification of what happens. Teachers aren't getting paid enough, especially the public school system. Teachers will either quit teaching in public schools or go to more lucrative private or charter schools because they pay more. because tuition at private and charter schools, at some charter schools, is increasingly high. Parents have no choice but to go into the public school system. But public school systems are overcrowded, underfunded. The teachers are overworked. At the same time, the children suffer because the quality of education has not been upgraded since the 80s. So again, this is a perfect storm when you take away education, especially books that challenge you. Like I still say it to this day, there are books out there, The Diary of Anne Frank, To Kill a Mockingbird, Of Mice and Men, The Grapes of Wrath, Great Expectations, more than your usual chicken soup for the teenage soul. There are actually books out there that challenge, books that make you think. At the same time, these used to be required reading in schools because we wanted to introduce critical processing thinking to kids, which now one county in Texas has decided, instead of actually following the law, we're going to do what we want. And the thing, it's a public library. That's the messed up part, beyond the messed up part. But we'll follow that story as it goes along. But anyway, moving again, guys, we do got to move to our next story, which again, these shootings are becoming more and more and more apparent. And in this case, this happened to happen right upstate from my backwards progressive home state of Tennessee. This happened in Louisville, Kentucky.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. It seems we can barely catch our breaths or dry the tears before another mass shooting rocks an American city. Just 2 weeks ago, I stood right here reporting the heartbreaking details of a school shooting in Nashville. Today, it happened at a bank in Louisville, Kentucky, in what the city's mayor calls an evil act of targeted violence after a man in his 20s, armed with a rifle, went on a rampage in a workplace attack, streaming the horror online as he carried out the crime. 4 people were killed, 9 others rushed to a hospital for treatment. Officers ran to the threat, confronting the gunman in an exchange of gunfire, killing the shooter. 2 police officers were among the wounded. Maggie Vespa is in Louisville tonight and has late details.
Tonight, chaos and carnage gripping another American city.
Let's be clear about what this was. This was an evil act of targeted violence.
The familiar terror unfolding in downtown Louisville, Kentucky. Around 8:30 this morning, police say a lone gunman opened fire inside this Old National Bank, killing 4 and wounding 9.
This was terrifying. It was terrifying.
Officers on the scene within 3 minutes. Investigators say this was not a random act.
White male who was employed at Old National Bank. His weapon of choice was a rifle.
Authorities identifying the shooter as Connor Sturgeon, who died at the scene in a shootout with police. He live streamed the rampage, according to investigators, who late today executed a search warrant on his home. Victims range in age from 40 to 64, including 63-year-old Thomas Elliott, the bank's senior vice president, according to his LinkedIn account, and a friend of Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear.
Tommy Elliott helped me build my law career, helped me become governor, gave me advice on being a good dad.
Among the wounded, 2 Louisville Metro police officers. 1, Officer Nicholas Wilt, shot in the head. J.D. Worley watched it happen in horror from his office across the street.
The other officers grabbed him and carried him off as he was unfortunately motionless. Never could have fathomed I would ever see something like this happen.
At 26, Officer Wilt is less than 2 weeks out of the academy.
Nick has come out of brain surgery and is in critical but stable condition as we speak.
Kentucky's governor praising police who raced to confront the gunman and asking for time to grieve.
It seems like we argue so much in this country, so much anger. But I still believe that love and compassion and humanity can lead us to a better place. Now, this is hard. It's really hard.
Maggie, any more details on a possible motive here?
So, Lester, according to 2 senior officials, authorities are investigating this as an instance of workplace violence, noting the suspect, who was an employee at that bank, may have suffered from mental health issues, and adding they expect much more to come out in the.
Well, mental health issues. Well, possible. I'm not knocking it because, again, this is still a brand new story and details are coming out. That being said, it goes right back to why some of these individuals are able to get a hold of firearms. And this is the whole point, that you will see a lot of people, especially those in the firearms communities, will be like, well, they're criminals. They shouldn't be able to get hold of guns. The criminals argument is a straw man's argument. Why they say straw man? Because straw man, for all those that don't know, definition wise, it's basically an argument you throw in to deter away from the subject. So if you sit there and say, well, it's a straw man's argument, it'll get argued. It takes away from the main point. At the same time, I have a straw man's argument. The one that introduces it has nothing to back it up. It's just that they'll keep repeating themselves as if it's gospel. And this is why I always say the criminal excuse is a straw man's argument. Oh, well, you can't stop criminals from getting a gun. Well, if you look into the ramifications of where they're getting these firearms, yes, you can. In the same sense, criminals are not the ones doing these mass shootings as of lately. Criminals are not the ones shooting up workplaces, banks, schools. It's not criminals. It is deeply disturbed individuals, or those who have a history, or those who are living in areas with lax gun laws, or are able to procure weapons. Those are the people that we're talking about, because it can't be criminal. You can't call it criminal after the fact, because if that's the case, then everybody that has guns never thought about actually shooting up the workplace is therefore in theory a criminal. That is the reason why gun laws and things of that nature are being discussed. They need to be. Gun reform needs to happen. And again, I've sat there and said many a times what I would do. Even those that consider themselves gun safety enthusiasts looked at my list of rules and regulations and went, that's a little harsh. You have to be. You have to be harsh. It has to be zero tolerance. Why? Because that is the true deterrent. Sitting there allowing personal accountability isn't working anymore. And like I said, in my home state of Tennessee, there are two things that are easily able to get in my home state of Tennessee: a driver's license, because any driver's license station is only going to take you around the block. You don't even get half the test that you probably get in other states. Driver's license, one, is easy. Number two is a firearm. And I've said it before. If you go to a gun, knife, and trade show in Tennessee, they will not run a background check, because gun, knife, and trade shows do not fall under commercial sales. They do not. As long as you have two things, and I've yet to have a person disagree with me or try to argue me with this, if you go to a gun, knife, trade show in Tennessee with just an ID and money, you walk out with a firearm. That's exactly the case. But again, this is the reason why gun reform needs to be talked about, needs to be implicated, and we need to be harsher, because there is simply no alternative. Moving right along, guys. Again, this is why I stand and say when it comes to certain things in law, the system is broken. Some people say the system is broken. I say no, the system isn't broken. It's working as it's designed. It just wasn't for us. In the meantime, a man named Grossly Green, who was accused of a murder he didn't commit, did get released, only as he was released to be told that he has to come back to prison because of the evidence. And as you watch this video, you'll see where there is a major injustice.
Presley has 3 sons, and he has many grandchildren. He's become such a role model for all of them, and such an inspiration in terms of, his character, his belief, his faith, how to move through life in an inspiring and respectful way.
when I got the news that he was going back to prison, I just feel terrible about it. He didn't belong there. He spent too many years there to start with. And to this day, I'll say he did not kill that boy.
He will do what it takes. He just believes this is one more step in the process, and he believes at the end of the day that justice will prevail.
Glad you're home. Glad to see this day, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
And it's And it's sad. It's sad because that man, think about that. I've said this before. There is a Mr. Green, plenty of them in the justice jail system. Has to be. Because imagine you convicted of a crime that you did not do, serving 33 years of life in prison, only to find out that your due process rights may have been violated. For all those that don't know, due process means you are read your Miranda rights. If you're not read your Miranda rights, when you're arrested, it basically violates the arrest and the crime. It's happened. There's actual legal precedent where people's due process was not given, and they actually and the case got thrown out. It could have been almost any. It's varied across various crimes, but the case was thrown out, and those people were allowed to walk free. So, in the case of Mr. Green, as you guys saw, for a crime he didn't commit, for a murder that he didn't commit, was eventually overturned because due process rights were violated, was released, and was out in the world 2 years, working and attending his life as going to church regularly and things of that nature, only to turn around and they said, well, it's not sufficient enough. A court of appeals said that the decision that the judge made was not sufficient enough and that he should go back and finish out his sentence, even though 3 witnesses have all recanted their stories saying the prosecutor forced them into it. I'm trying to figure this out for as long as I live. That if your standing case depends on 3 witnesses who at one point said one thing, but then recanted and said another, and said that, oh, well, we were forced to lie on the stand by the prosecutor. How does that not cause a giant conflict of interest to the point where it's like, well, we need to interview the prosecutor needs to be brought up? Because do I think that Mr. Green will get out? I hope that to be so. Because again, this man served 33 years of a crime he did not commit. And I don't know about the rest. And the restitution, as far as being convicted of a crime you didn't do, can vary in whatever state you're in. But for the simple fact of the matter is, how in the world was this allowed to happen if the standing witnesses are all saying the same thing? It's almost as if and I say this all the time, it's almost as if the court system does not allow for fallacy. It does not allow for it. It's like the court system believes it's infallible, when in truth, justice does make mistakes and therefore needs to be corrected. And also at the same time, those that actually assisted in that travesty of a court case, which again sent Mr. Green to jail, should also be brought up if they're still around. But it just goes to show you this: the reason why the Innocence Project, and many other for-profit organizations out there to help challenge the legal system are there for a reason. Because you hear stories like this, it just makes you wonder, number one, that could have been me, and number two, how completely fracked up the justice system it is, especially to our people of color, truly is. But speaking of justice, the Dominion lawsuit is finally moving forward with Fox News, and I myself cannot be prouder because, again, this will be the 3rd time Fox News has to admit they're not a real news station, mostly propaganda.
Just sanctioned Fox News for withholding evidence in the Dominion defamation lawsuit. The move comes after the same judge ruled that Fox could not argue newsworthiness as a defense for broadcasting false information about Dominion voting machines. This case is supposed to go to trial in a matter of days. Joining me now is NBC News Digital senior reporter Jane Tim. So, Jane, let me ask you first about this sanction. What's going on?
So the judge heard evidence that was not turned over to lawyers in court today. Dominion lawyers brought a recording that Abby Grossberg, who was the producer who says that her deposition was coerced and that she was intimidated by lawyers to try and protect Fox, that she had on her Otter, this app that lots of reporters use to record conversations and get a transcript of it, that she turned over this evidence, but that the lawyers themselves did not turn it over to Dominion as they were required. So when the judge heard this evidence, he was pretty miffed and essentially sanctioned Fox and said, look, I may take even further action, but essentially said if Dominion needs another deposition, you're gonna have it, and that Fox is gonna have to pay for it. And that was the sanction here.
And he might appoint a special master?
Yeah, so he said that he might appoint a special master to investigate sort of what happened here, how there's this surprise evidence. You know what? Judge Davis made it really clear even weeks ago. He didn't want some smoking gun evidence to come in days before trial. And it sounds like that's potentially what has happened. I haven't heard the recordings myself, so I don't know what there's being said, but there's definitely evidence that they say wasn't turned over and absolutely should have been.
Let me ask you about this other ruling that came yesterday about what they can and cannot argue in court. So part of what we had heard about Fox's defense was that when they were airing these claims about Dominion voting machines, about the election, that they were claims the president was making, so they were newsworthy, and that was why they had to cover them. Obviously, they covered it in a much different way. Covered it is even a strong word. They did it in a much different way than every other news organization did. When the judge rules they cannot argue newsworthiness, what does that do to Fox's defense? What other defense do they have?
It severely limits their defense. I mean, they can still argue that the Constitution protects them, that the First Amendment is involved here, though even that was limited. And I will say that it's not completely removed from how they're going to talk about this. There's going to be witnesses who say we did this because it was newsworthy. But he said the lawyers cannot go argue this as a legal argument. So he said, stay away from the word newsworthy in your opening arguments this next week. But they can, it's going to come up. You're going to hear conversations of newsworthy in trial at least.
So, long and short of that is, Fox News is going to have to admit that it's not newsworthiness, it's propaganda. Now, keep in mind, this is actually going back to the Dominion Wigan during the election, where Fox News and its various hosts, all try to point out the fact that Dominion voting systems were compromised, that they were changing votes from Trump to Biden, that they were helping Biden win the Biden campaign win the presidency, and come to find out that it's all false. And Dominion was like, oh no, we still getting our bread back because you affected our business. So it's interesting that Fox News is really bent over a rail because they have to sit and say, oh, well, you did it for the ratings. You did it for the ratings because if you told the truth, if Fox News, that joke of a news station, ever told the truth, viewership would go right out the window. If Hannity, Ingram, and Carlson all started speaking the truth, the viewership would fly out the window. Hence the reason why we're here. Hence the reason why we're here with this lawsuit. And I cannot wait for this court case to start. But moving right along, guys, I want to get to this story as well because, again, with gun violence happening in the U.S. at an alarming rate, you guys have heard me say this in the past. The CDC actually wanted to do a study on gun violence and mental health. And, of course, the NRA at the time, which was very powerful, used the GOP and some Democrats to actually kill the bill, which would have gave funding to the CDC to look into the study between mental health and firearms. And now, the after effect.
Funeral for a shooting victim wrapped up in D.C. today. Gunfire erupted again. One man killed, 3 others hurt. From workplace violence to school shootings, according to a new survey from the Kaiser Family Foundation, a majority of U.S. adults have either personally or had a family member who's been impacted by a gun-related incident. Including suicide, nearly 1 in 5 Americans have lost a family member to gun violence, with people of color disproportionately impacted.
So is this about mental health or is it about easy access to guns?
It's about both of them.
Jackie Rowe Adams lost 2 sons, Anthony and Tyrone, to gun violence. She now runs a support group in Harlem.
When I hear about this constant shooting, it pains me.
I hurt so bad because I know another family, another mother, father family is hurting for the loss of their loved one.
As the nationwide debate over access to guns heats up, a day after the mass shooting in Louisville, the city's mayor fumed over a state law that requires confiscated firearms, like the rifle the killer used on Monday, to be resold at auction.
It's time to change this law and let us destroy illegal guns and destroy the guns that have been used to kill our friends and kill our neighbors.
While in Tennessee, Republican Governor Bill Lee today called for stronger background checks for gun purchases.
The executive order will, for one thing, set a 72-hour clock for reporting new criminal activity.
Other states like Maryland, Washington, and Colorado are moving forward with new restrictions as gun rights advocates push back on what they consider unconstitutional overreach.
No amount of gun control is going to stop a criminal hell-bent on murder from gaining some tools to do it.
The Kaiser survey also showed that about a third of adults have avoided large crowds due to the possibility of gun violence.
Crazy, right? Crazy. To think, if only we had that CDC study so long ago, that now we saw gun violence impacts us as a whole. And you guys heard again from those that are for guns. Well, you're not going to stop criminals from getting the guns. That's just not going to happen. You heard the straw man. You heard the straw man argument, right? Because that's all they have. That is all they have. That argument has been dissected. That argument has been really turned on its head against them, but that's all they have. Crazy, isn't it? Well, you know what else is crazy? Another strike. Rutgers University, thousands of their faculty members are going to thousands of Rutgers faculty members are going on strike. Why? For the same thing as always it used to be. Salary increases, better job security, guaranteed funding for graduate students, and that's just some of the requests. Think about that. We've seen it with teachers in various areas. We've seen it with nurses. And we're seeing it again at the university. We saw it also with city workers. We saw it at companies like Kellogg's and John Deere, where those union workers went on strike. And it's always the same thing. Increased pay, better benefits, things of that nature. This is why I keep saying the entire time, for all those employers and corporations out there who are reaping the lion's share, who are having record profits in this pandemic area, who are record profits. I've said it before. It is amazing to me how they are simply tone deaf to where I said before. You want to solve inflation? Raising rates is how the Feds deal with inflation because they want to halt consumer spending. But here's the problem when you halt consumer spending. There's the supply and demand. You're going to have a lot of supply and very little demand, which means that companies are going to start kicking back or laying off individuals because, again, they're trying to keep their profit margins up. But how you solve all of this? Again, well, two parts, actually. For employers and corporations, pay people a living wage. Yes. Will this eat into your profits? Yes. But you'll still come out on top. But for those companies that are actually paying their employers, you'll never hear their employees complain about pay. They may complain about other things going on in that company, but the one thing they'll never complain about is the pay, if it's sustainable to them. And the other one is, from the government side of the world, raise the minimum wage. That's why I say it's two parts. Because if you raise the federal minimum wage right now, which is still $7.29 in 2023, it is $7.29. Imagine if you raise the federal minimum wage to anywhere between $26 to $29, from anywhere from $24 to $27 an hour. Well, that's crazy. No, it's not. Because everything's going up but your income. No matter how much saving you do, no matter how many expenses you cut out, no matter how many times does Republicans say, well, maybe you shouldn't get that Starbucks every day? No matter what you do to save money, as long as the income is the same and your expenses are higher, it will always, always, always be a game of trying to catch up, but never getting ahead. It's like the mouse in the wheel that's trying to get the cheese, and there's a hole where the mouse can step out and grab the cheese, but we don't see the hole. That's why I keep saying, especially with Rutgers and those who are on strike, it's simply put, give the people what they want. At the same time, they're your workers. You depend on them as it stands. So I never understood why in the world that we just simply don't pay individuals. Because you'll pay for the people that you want, but it's amazing. It's like in this, especially we just came from what they call those workers, essential workers. You call them essential workers, but you still treated them like expendable. You treat them expendable. You treat them like they're expendable workers. And that alone should tell you a lot. But again, we'll follow that story with Rutgers and seeing where they go with it as far as the strike goes on. That being said, though, President Biden did actually do a symbolic signing of the pandemic emergency restrictions being written down, signaling that we might be at the end. I'm kind of doubtful.
Into us also out of the Biden administration, with the president taking a significant and symbolic step into a post-pandemic world. The White House is just now saying that the president has just signed a bill that will end the national emergency declared during the COVID pandemic. Remember, that's a state of emergency that had been in place for more than 3 years after then President Trump declared it in March of 2020. NBC's Monica Alba is joining us now. And Mon, it is not unexpected that the president signed this bill into law. Once it made it through Congress, the White House came out and essentially said, hey, President Biden opposes this, but he will sign it. It winds down this national emergency in May. This is symbolically significant. It may also have some real world impact here, right? Talk to us through it.
Exactly, Hallie. And this is something that House Republicans, when they took control, said they were going to do very quickly. And indeed, they introduced it. And when it passed, the White House said, look, we wouldn't like for this to become reality in February, which is when this was being discussed earlier. Let's see if we can get a little more time, because they wanted to give agencies, things like hospitals, anybody that deals with healthcare, a little bit of time to wind this down. Because once this national COVID emergency ends, a lot of things that are tied up in sort of the justification for how they were done. When it comes to things like Medicare, different kinds of health insurance, certain things could be authorized because they were citing this national COVID emergency. So once that's done, and in some cases 60 days after, certain things that were available and that people could take advantage of will no longer exist. And so indeed, President Biden said he wasn't going to veto this, that he was okay with signing it, even though he wasn't in favor of what much of the legislation says, because again, this was something that was put forth by House Republicans. But this is a little bit different from the public health emergency, which the White House has said is also going to expire just a couple of weeks from now in May, which is tied to another big implication here when we talk about immigration, something we've discussed many times on your show, and the fact that Title 42, which is that Trump era public health policy, is essentially going to cease to exist. And then you really could see an influx, experts say, of migrants at the border seeking asylum who won't be turned away under that Title 42 authority. So that's still a couple of weeks away. But this is really a moment in time that the White House is marking and saying 3 years into the pandemic that it is no longer a national emergency, even though, of course, there are still things like vaccines, boosters, and discussions that this president wants to keep discussing and says are still important tools in battling COVID. Hallie.
You make an important distinction, Mom, between this and between the public health emergency. It does feel like the start over the next few weeks of this sort of moment. I think back to when you and I were covering the White House in, February, March of 2020, and the so many lives lost, right, to COVID, the way that people are looking to move beyond COVID now. That has been very clear, what you've seen from Americans' feelings about the pandemic and where the majority of Americans are. And it does feel a little bit like a time to sort of stop and take stock of where we are as a country.
Absolutely. And so I think what you're really speaking to there, Hallie, is this cultural shift that so many of us look around and see in our own families with our own friends. And then on top of that, we're seeing just the political dynamic change here as well with some of the things that were stood up that were really critical in those early days that many can look at now and say, thank God they're not as needed as they once were in the beginning when we knew so little and there was still so much.
So, yeah. So as you can see, the president did do a signing of saying that we are drawing down the national emergency COVID parameters, if you will. Now, now, let me also stress this very heavily. This does not mean that COVID is over. I mean, yes, we still, some areas, depending on where you're at, you still got to wear a mask. You still have to protect yourself, things of that nature. This does affect the Title 19, which unfortunately is still in place. But it does mean that we do need to solve not only our health problem, but our immigration problem as well. But again, I do have to give the Biden administration some credit on how they handled COVID, just because of Trump's mishandling, I guess you can say, and just flat out trying to take credit for stuff he didn't do. It just didn't make any sense. But before we get to our feel good segment, guys, one last story, and this is more of a historical context, because unless you know about the wall in Baltimore and redlining and the fact that home ownership and people of color and the vast divide, you'll understand why this next story is definitely has great importance.
This brick is one of many which made up the spike wall here at the old Northwood Plaza Shopping Center, one of the saddest chapters in history for Morgan State University. A wall of segregation which once separated black and white communities has now become a relic of the past.
And in 1939, the neighbors then started building what was labeled a spite wall, a hate wall, to prevent Morgan State students from simply walking across the street into the all-white neighborhood and to shop at an all-white shopping center here.
Since then, Morgan State has made its presence known on the grounds of the old shopping plaza. Among the additions, a new school of business.
These same grounds are the grounds that students like them protested on. They said, I don't care how many walls you build, we're going to come over here and we're going to sit in these establishments and you are going to serve us and we're not going to leave until that happens.
Now a new story is being told by the university and the community located on the other side of the spike wall.
And we're definitely excited and finally glad to see this wall come down. It's held us apart from each other for years unnecessarily. So we are glad to see our homes be embraced by Morgan State. And again, we're just over the moon about it.
University School of Architecture and Planning will use what's left of the wall as a teaching and learning tool for students.
Our Morgan Wall will basically go the perimeter of the site, leaving wide openings to get into the shopping center, and then just continuing just to give a sense of place and a sense of security.
We're told a portion of the spike wall will remain up and at some point become a university park, a public park, and a reminder of what took place here on the campus of Morgan State University.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do history. Yes, the spike wall that was with Morgan State University because of the fact of segregation, because they didn't want black students walking in white neighborhoods. And I love what they did. They literally tore down great portions of the wall, as they should. But they also are deciding to use portions of that wall as a teaching tool. See, Tennessee, you can learn from this. Instead of holding on to your Confederate generals and your rebel flag, your rebel battle flags, and saying, it's part of my heritage. No, unless your heritage is ignorance, then yes, wave that flag as high as you want. But I will give it to them in Baltimore because, again, when it comes to segregation, home ownership, and the fact of the matter is that racism is still alive and well today, there are those out there that are simply trying to make things better. And that is a beautiful way to do it. So that being said, guys, we are going to move to our feel good segment because usually how the fact we got here, we do cover a lot of things that are doom and gloom. Sometimes we use your faith in humanity, but hey, it is Thursday. So tomorrow being Friday, which means that we're not too far off. We will leave you guys out some good vibrations. And who knew that Tony Hawk would still be doing great things, especially with the Native American community.
is breathtaking. 27,000 square miles of quiet beauty. But for kids growing up here, maybe too quiet. That's why so many are attracted to this sound. Navajo Nation loves to skate. Just check out their president doing an ollie.
Friends to come out, you skate, you challenge one another, and you keep each other accountable.
But the reservation itself has been a skateboarding desert. Kids had to find a ride dozens of miles away just to get their wheels running. 12-year-old Cheyenne has been doing it for years.
I just like doing it because it's fun. It teaches me to be more active.
These remote communities need more opportunities to have outdoor recreations.
Something skaters could call their own became a community's cause. And with assistance from an organization called the Skate Park Project and its famous founder, Tony Hawk.
Thank you for bringing change to this community.
The Dene Skate Garden was set in concrete.
How important is this to have an outlet, especially for kids in a community that's been less served traditionally?
I think it's hugely important, especially in a community like this. When kids find skateboarding, I think they find something that speaks to them in a deeper way and something that can teach them a lot of life lessons about overcoming their goals, about overcoming challenges.
Now, somewhere like that exists right here.
I'm really excited for them so that they can be here, they can be a part of the community.
A place of pride, a culture of tradition, now embracing the great sanctuary of skate. Steve Patterson, NBC News.
And again, I just thought that was pretty cool, just because of the fact that you have a bunch of kids, and I get it. I never really got to skateboard. Don't get me wrong, love Tony Hawk, love the X Games. But the fact that you're introducing that to kids to be introduced to skateboarding as an outlet, as to really you really get a sense of things, because certain things like action sports can really open doors for people. So again, love the fact that, again, it's for the kids. Can't knock it. But that's going to do for this podcast, guys. Thank you all for watching, for liking, for letting people know this is live. I certainly appreciate that. Some shameless plug before I do it, guys. Before I get off this soapbox. Shout out to my boy Big Vaughn, Big BZA Dot, on all social media. You can definitely check him out there, as well as his Gmail account, as well as his Beat Trap music channel. So where there's plenty of free music, he will not do what Zuckerberg does and sends copyright strikes. And also, if you are interested in buying music, then he will definitely be up for that definitely up for that as well. So definitely check him out, Big BZA Dot, on all social media. As for myself, guys, you can find me BlackBox447 on all social media, as I usually do reviews on everything that I read, that I play and watch and gym stuff, and I do a couple push-ups. At the same time, guys, link at the bottom and make that just a wee bit bigger for you guys to find us at. If you copy and paste that link into your browser, take you to our link tree. That's YouTube and Facebook groups for all of our podcasts. How the Frack We Got Here, Get Bit, and of course, the Offense Podcast. Like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the show and everything that we discussed. I do want to keep the conversation going. That being said, guys, again, we need to be more welcoming, more congratulating, more networking, uplifting each other, because we are all in the same boat. But the only way we're going to get ahead is that we work together, not against each other. At the same time, tell somebody that made it congratulations. It takes less energy to say congratulations than it takes 100% to be salty and still be mad afterwards, because they'll be moving forward while you're sitting there stuck there. So again, don't be a dick. Aside from that, guys, the last thing I'll say about how the Frack We Got Here, it's all about staying informed. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We are simply giving you all the information, allowing you to make up your own mind, but we do provide a logical perspective that does go along with it. We do a lot better in society as we're informed. We're progressive. We move forward. We try to right the wrongs of our past by making decisions now that we should have done back then, like electing our first Black woman to the Supreme Court, electing our first Black woman to the Federal Board of Governors, electing our first Black national cybersecurity director. Try saying that 5 times fast. All great things. We don't learn from history. We are doomed to repeat it. That's why we keep asking ourselves, why does everything go up with our paycheck? Why are we electing the same politicians, but still the same old game in Congress? And most importantly, how the Frack We Got Here. Thank you all for watching, guys. Take care of yourselves and each other. We will all